Hello and welcome to another Analytic Endeavours live stream, our second live stream here. I'm joined by Dan, who's going to talk to us today. Why don't you introduce yourself and let us know what you're talking about?
Hey, thanks, Steve. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone who's on the call. It's a pleasure to join you today. So yeah, thank you, Steve, for bringing me along. I'm going to be talking today about some concepts within the data world, and really it's around how we turn an initial data idea into an enterprise scalable model. It's sort of somewhat of a journey and an evolving thing that I've been working on over quite a number of years, which is centered around a typical software delivery lifecycle, but then sort of adds in elements of human-centered design and agile methodologies as well.
Excellent. Really, really interesting topic, I think, one that I'm definitely very interested in. And just same as if you joined our stream before, this is a joint live stream between Analytic Endeavours and Havens Consulting. So Analytic Endeavours is a consultancy formed by two MVPs, so myself and Reed Havens. So if you are joining on the Analytics Endeavours YouTube, come over, on the Havens Consulting YouTube, come over to the Analytic Endeavours if you do want to ask questions, because that's the one we're monitoring. Excellent. So Dan, first time obviously on our channel and or Reed's channel. We're both got British accents, but you do not live in England at the moment.
No, I had to get out of there, I'm afraid, Steve. I've been I've been over in Australia for about 10 years now, so I'm based in Adelaide, South Australia.
If you saw the weather in England today, I don't blame you. It's not particularly pleasant, quite rainy. Probably a little different in Adelaide, I'm sure.
Well, we had about 46 yesterday. My car told me on the way to a thing last night, but today it's actually a bit rainy. I think we've got a storm coming, so hopefully my internet holds up all right.
Fair enough. So yeah, Dan, it's really good to have you. We've been chatting a bit. Before we get into the presentation, I'd love to hear about yourself, where you're working, and sort of what your role is now.
Cool, thank you. So look, I've been in the data space for 20 odd years, which is terrifying to say, and it's kind of become somewhat normalized. I speak to other people I work with, contemporaries. They're all at a similar sort of point in their careers, and I just can't believe that I've been in this space for so long. But it's kind of cool, and I've seen a lot of change in that time, especially over the last sort of 10 years. Things have just really ramped up. My background isn't really in data. My education is actually founded in art and design. So I've got a degree in fine art. So that's everything from like large scale paintings to sculpture to video productions and photography and editing and things like that. So there was sort of a bit of a link back into technology. And when I couldn't make it as a poor art student, I tried to pick up any sort of job I could using a computer. And I had a chance encounter with a friend of mine who was like, "Oh, you're good with technology and art. Why don't you build some reports for me?" So he sort of got me building reports in this tool called Business Objects, SAP Business Objects, which some people haven't actually heard of anymore, but it's a thing still, I believe. But that's where I cut my teeth. And my career sort of moved between IT and the business back and forth throughout my career. I've been lucky to be involved in some really sort of large scale data analytics projects. And right now I'm consulting for a really awesome data analytics consultancy based in South Australia called Data Sagacity. I'm a principal consultant there and do a whole range of things in the data strategy, data governance space, but also like to roll my sleeves up every now and again and build solutions in Power BI and Fabric as well.
Excellent. It's really interesting to hear. I hear your sort of story a lot in data, where people come from a completely different field. You get people coming in from finance, you get people coming from art, and kind of data. Everyone likes to play in data, to use data to do reporting, BI, and data engineering. So it's interesting to hear on how people get into it.
It's funny, isn't it? It's like it's kind of the foundation. It's problem solving, right? Like producing art and trying to express what you see around you and convey that message to an audience and storytell. It's just like I would never have made the connection until I sort of became involved in it. And when I've sort of analyzed it myself, it does make a lot of sense. And when I say to people, I've got a fine art background, they assume I've said finance, but yeah, because they sound similar. But yeah, no, I think it's funny. It draws all sorts of people into this industry, and I think that's what gives
definitely that common thread, as you said, of that problem solving. Because I think at the end of the day, that is what we do in data, and it is finding solutions, solving problems. And I think anyone who comes from a background that enjoys doing that, they get a taste of data, and a lot of people really enjoy working here and playing with it.
Absolutely.
Perfect. So I'm really interested to hear a bit more about the topic, and definitely go through what we're going to be going through today. A lot of it's stuff that you've sort of created and some solutions and that you've been working on for a while, I believe. Is that true?
Yeah, absolutely. So look, this is, I suppose, I've been working on models and things like this for a really long time without knowing it. And then I've found myself in situations, especially with larger organizations, where you're involved in these massive BI projects. You have a lot of really smart external consultants come in, and then you're sort of left holding this baby. And the organization's then like, what do we do with this screaming baby now? Like, we're not ready for this. So it's about, I guess it's about putting mechanisms in place to help organizations prepare for that, and then also be able to nurture and care and grow this screaming baby themselves. So yeah, the concepts, I suppose, have been brought around by lots of different people, lots of different things that I've read and seen. And it's just started to crystallize over the last couple of years and become something of I wouldn't necessarily call it a product just yet, but I do think it's getting close to something that you could land in an organization and deploy. And I've done that recently with an organization, and it's working really well, and it's exciting to see. So yeah, what I'm presenting is a lot of different concepts which have been brought together, and yeah, a lot of my own work as well. So yeah, and I'm personally passionate about it, and it's something that I'm excited to talk about today.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's a really interesting point you bring up there, because data platforms, BI, data models, reports, they are, and you brought up the word product, right? And it's good to start thinking things or products like that, especially things that you deploy and the companies, and as you say, external companies have built, because they need looking after, right? It's not something you can't just, here's a model, here's some reports, they're going to work forever. Things have life cycles, things have needs and need to be looked after. So I think this is a really interesting topic, and I'm super excited to see what you have to present. So cool. With that, I think it's good to get introduced, and let's start off with the presentation.
Okay, thank you, Steve. So look, if anyone is joining on this stream, do feel free to jump into questions and things like that. I'll sort of pause for gaps, Steve, for you as well, but also if you want to jump in, like, please do. I've presented a similar thing to this a couple of different times, but this will probably be the longest I've presented it for. So I've added in a few extra nuggets and insights in there and expanded some parts out that I think will be interesting. So we'll see how we go for time. I'll keep an eye on things. So I suppose the first thing is we've sort of done introductions already, but just kind of in terms of what I really sort of spend a lot of my time in is that data strategy and coaching space with organizations, and I do love to do data visualization things as well. Fun fact: so my hobby, I'm really into different board sports. So that's everything from wakeboarding, snowboarding, kite surfing, electric longboarding. Most recently, I've got this board which has 2 pivoting plates that I strap myself to and jump into bowls and ramps. And yeah, I try and keep myself in one piece mostly, but it's not always the case. So yeah, it's interesting. I'm going to be talking about some data governance aspects today, and it's like, for some people that's a fairly non-exciting subject, but I find it super interesting. So I'm fairly diverse in my left-right sort of brain capacity, I suppose, in that regard. Data Sagacity on the right, that's a company that I'm working for, which is awesome. Go check it out. And I've got a bit of a visual timeline at the bottom, which, yeah, I won't dwell on too much. Anyways, so what are we going to talk about today? So I'm going to do things a little bit unconventionally. I'm going to start with some questions, and I'm going to wrap up with some questions. But I think it's kind of good to just put those thoughts out there before we jump into the why we're doing this. So I'll talk about what the key objectives are of the various frameworks that I'm going to discuss today that comprise this enterprise data delivery model. Going to spend a bit of time talking about proof of concept versus proof of value, because they are a bit different and important to the way that we deliver as well. People are obviously a massive part of this piece, and having empathy for people, I think, is the best way for these data products to have a really good life, and not a really short life, which can be really expensive for organizations and not deliver the value that they would like. Frameworks. So, you know, this is that typical people, process, technology kind of equation we'll be digging into, but the frameworks really support the people. We'll start to look at as well at how we measure value. So it's no good being able to say we've done this thing, it has this, you know, incredible, you know, return on investment if you can't actually measure what the return on that investment actually is, whether that's financial or whether it's, you know, the benefit that it's providing to the organization. Then I'll sort of wrap up with some final thoughts and, you know, kind of where this could go next, because as I said, it's, you know, this is an evolving subject. It's something that each time it changes and I add bits to it. So, you know, I am sharing this with a public community. You know, it's not something I'm keeping to myself, and I would love it if people were to reach out and suggest other ideas or, you know, hear what other people are doing, because I'm sure there's other ways to do this as well. And then, you know, I'll take a stop for some questions at the end, Steve, from yourself, or if there's anything that comes up in the chat as well, I'm happy to answer as we go, or you know, save them to the end as well. All right, ready for me to dig in?
Definitely, very excited.
Let's go. All right, so question time. So when I've done this before, it's kind of been a case of it's almost like that I have never kind of game, or more of a have you ever. So imagine you're in a project, and I've personally found myself in this position as well, where you're in this project, you're delivering it, and someone asks, well, what's the business problem that you're addressing here? And people sort of look at each other a bit, and they think they know what the business problem is, but no one's really clearly articulated what that problem is. And on top of that, you're asked, well, what's the, you know, how do you justify the value for the work that you're doing? Like this dashboard has cost me $100,000 or something. Like, how is it going to return that investment? So, and another thing that I've seen, which is really common but terrifying, is, you know, you're presented an idea, you know, we need to bring up all this data and we need to build these things, you know, but it turns out not to be a very good idea. You get really far along and you've put your chips in, and people just don't want to accept that it was a bad idea. So a lot of what I'm going to be talking about today is, let's understand early that something's potentially going to fail and let it fail. Like, that's fine. Like, it's actually okay for things to fail, and quite a good thing, because something failing early is going to save the organization a lot more money than if it goes the full distance and then turns out to be a bad idea. On the other side of that equation is, you know, you've got some really cool stuff that you're building, but how do you work out what goes first? You know, how do you get your engineering team, for instance, bringing the right things in to the data platform? Or, you know, how do you prioritize the, you know, a list of enhancements that an organization wants over multiple different products when you've only got a smaller sort of team? And back to that screaming baby point earlier as well, as an organization, how do you ongoingly deliver? I don't think ongoingly is a word, but on an ongoing basis, how do you deliver results, and how do you perform a repeatable process for this, which is consistent and understandable by the organization? And the final point is around self-service. So we're all, in every organization that you work in for data analytics, I guarantee you there'll be a leader there that wants self-service. Then they need it, because everyone wants self-service analytics, right? And our tools and our technologies have really caught up to the point where, you know, mere mortals can pick them up and do really, really awesome things with them now. So how do we prepare people and how do we provide them the other things and soft skills and data literacy that they need to actually be able to do this at an enterprise scale and take things, really cool ideas from their desks that they may be built in a tool like Power BI and turn that into an enterprise scale solution. So to address these problems, a bit of a statement here, but kind of coining this an enterprise data delivery model, but it provides that robust, repeatable process for managing this end-to-end data life cycle. And the key bolded parts at the bottom there, people and value, I think are the two key parts of this. So having that empathy for people, but also having that empathy for the organization and understanding, what the purpose of this thing is and how it's going to benefit the organization. So let's have a look at some objectives then. So these could be, and by the way I'm going to talk about this today, I'm talking about something that's been built, right? And I'm sharing this as an idea. I'm not going to share absolutely everything because there just wouldn't be time and people would get bored and zone out. But I'm going to try and get the balance of, this is something that's been built that's working right now, but also here's some ideas on how to implement it as well. So when we talk about framework objectives, in organizations, you've got to start with a vision and you've got to understand strategically what the organization wants from any sort of analytics investment. So a lot of times I hear this referred to as policies or, guiding principles or something like that. So think of this as a placeholder for whatever the organization really coins or deems as their sort of manifesto, I suppose, to deliver something. So in this regard, there's three components, right? So there's the data governance and management aspect, which is what this is. So it's like, how do we create a central data asset for the organization that it can use to generate insights? How do we make the information clear to the organization so they know what data is available to be using? How do we put the right guardrails up so people have flexibility and freedom, but don't go too far in the wrong direction? And also, how do we move people towards solutions which have been more carefully constructed and governed and have been strategically built compared to, that typical shadow IT or black ops kind of approach where everyone's building their own different data silos and own solutions? Let's kind of bring things back together so we have that end-to-end visibility right across our data estate. The next part is around, we've got this platform. How do we make it efficient and how do we create a place where people are empowered to do this work, where they have these boundaries that they know that they can work in, that they may occasionally go outside of, but they kind of have enough space to do what they need to do. We want to reduce all of that sort of technical debt, and we want to bring people on the journey so that they're learning and growing together. And then the final thing is around value creation. So quite often, data is a really, really powerful asset to an organization. And organizations that use it really well are actually able to quantify what that costs or what that is worth to an organization in terms of its value. So if we're going to build a platform where people are building really cool things, is there an opportunity for that organization to generate revenue from this asset as well? So, yeah, and whether that's in terms of external, monetary assets or things that benefit the organization in other ways. So yeah, governance, collaboration, value are the key sort of themes of this and the reasons why we're looking to do it. So I'm going to talk to you now about proof of concept versus proof of value. I was actually looking for some really cool sound effects for those things to collide, but I never managed it. So just assume there's a doosh, doosh sort of effect happening here. I find quite often the terms are used interchangeably. And another one that's thrown in is MVP, so minimal viable product. And people use them in the same way. And I think they can be used interchangeably. But in the way that I'm using them, I do differentiate the difference between a proof of concept and proof of value. So the objective of a proof of concept really is to test something works quickly and cheaply. And it's more from a technology perspective. Whereas the objective of a proof of value is more around, what's the impact of the thing that we're building for the business, and what's the value associated with that. And the focus then for the POC is around that viability and initial feasibility, whereas the proof of value or POV is more around the strategic fit and the benefits that it provides to the organization. So because of that, the scope is often more restricted for a POC. You know, you can spin something up really quick, work out, did it work? Yes, brilliant. We didn't need to involve people in that process. We've tested it out, it works. Now we're ready to move this thing out and actually work out, you know, is this going to work inside the organization? We've proven technically it's possible, but realistically, are our organization going to use the thing that we've just built? So the outcome for that then is, you know, let's check it works, and then let's check that it actually has meaningful value to the organization. So we're going to talk more from the perspective of a POV as part of this framework, but the POC will always be there as well. You need to test things out still, and especially from a technology perspective, before you start bringing people into the journey and doing that as well.
Dan, would you say in your experience that in a typical project, you would normally do both?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and I think I try and refer to the POV as a POV when it's happening, because there are more people involved, and you know, you want there to be a bit of a delineation. I mean, we're building something here that we want to maybe it's like a slice of the overall solution, right? We're not going to build the entire thing. We're just going to build part of it, but that part is going to go on to hopefully have a beautiful life. The POC might not. You might run that for half a day, and know that it's going to be thrown away at the end of it, and that's okay. So that's sort of why I draw the delineation. But definitely, I think you would start with the POC first, and a lot of the time, I find that comes in that initial discovery phase when you're trying to learn about what you're trying to do, and you'll do a quick POC to make sure that you're not going to put maybe a big quote out to a client to say, hey, we're going to build this really cool thing, but we don't actually know if we can do it. You know, you want to do a POC first to make sure it's possible. Then you can work out whether the thing that you know you can build has genuine, you know, usability and utility to it. So people are a massive part of what we do in the data space, and having empathy for people is, I would say, the most important thing to getting adoption and growing solutions within an organization. If you build things people can't use or don't want to use, they won't be successful, and they will go back to doing things the way they used to do them. So personas are a way that we can understand different people in the organization and their roles. Some people think of these as hats, you know, and you might wear multiple hats in your day-to-day. You know, you might go from being a stakeholder to being a technical specialist to being something else. Same way in that as an analyst, you might go and do some data engineering work, and then you might go and build some reports. And a lot of these roles are changing. So I'm going to throw a few up. Again, because this is not set in stone, these personas are going to change and can be kind of can be developed in a way that suits the organization. So every organization is going to have stakeholders, though, whether you call them stakeholders or not. They're people that are interested in driving value for the organization and using data to do that as part of their journey. A lot of those stakeholders as well in more mature organizations where you have a central body of people that are making decisions, you'll sort of refer to them as a steering committee, and they'll be responsible for having that executive oversight of things and making decisions on how major pieces of work move forward. Then we have our guys that everyone loves, the design and change kind of authorities. So you have to have that sort of point of reasoning when you're building solutions from an enterprise level. And, you know, you often will hear the term like a design authority or a DA or a change advisory board. And they're the sorts of people that you'll sort of, in larger organizations, put a formal request forward to say, hey, we want to make this change. Let's say we just want to promote something from test to production. What's the impact of that going to be? So it's that more sort of formal way of working, often with the IT team, right? Delivery teams are going to be mentioned in here. And these are, I quite often find myself working more to an agile methodology rather than that typical waterfall way of working. I think it's somewhat blended though over the years and isn't like true agile, which is probably what I started trying to do. But the concept of bringing people together into a team with the right set of skills to deliver an outcome for the organization. So it could be a really small squad or it could be a really big squad, or it might be a predefined team that already exists that's going to deliver a solution for the organization. So I'm just going to get some water. Better. Right. So center of excellence. So this is your central hub and your team that are going to be trying to establish and build and design a lot of these best practices and ways of working, maybe different tools, templates, frameworks, those types of things. And I've seen this happen in organizations in a consolidated way where they've had, budget to put together a data analytics team, and they're their experts and they're the guiding light for the organization. I've also seen it where it's been decentralized, where you've brought people together from right across the organization, and that becomes your center of excellence. I also heard the term I quite like center of enablement as well. And quite often that will then support the delivery of initiatives within a community of practice as well. So that broader set of data champions from across the organization that are really interested, but perhaps don't have, dedicated capacity to build and design these things. They just want to learn from these people and bring that into their day jobs. We have more technical personas as well, or used in the organization that are, responsible for bringing data into the platform. This could be an analytics engineer. It could be a data analyst in your organization. For smaller organizations, you might not call them specifically that. They might do a number of different things. But I'm sort of delineating here because at certain parts, that's the sort of the role that's being played. And then sort of at the end of this, you've got the consumer who's going to receive this data product that is going to be built in whatever way. It might be a stream of data. It might be a dashboard, some sort of output that they can use, a tool perhaps. And they're going to use that to derive some sort of meaningful value for the organization, make decisions, help grow the organization in a specific direction. So I've been talking a lot about this enterprise data delivery model concept. It's probably a good time to jump into kind of what it is. So it combines two complementary frameworks. So the POV capability delivery framework and the ongoing operational delivery framework. So these two things are slightly different. The first one really is around experimentation and learning. So you can think of this as, how do we capture and channel demand in the organization? How do we pick the right things? How do we explore them further? And then how do we align that back to our strategic goals and work out whether or not it's something that we should follow through? But at this stage, we want to make sure that we're doing the right thing and we're not going to build the wrong thing, essentially. The second part then is, okay, so we've got this awesome idea. It's promising all this great value. We've built it. We've tested the organization. They love it. They want it. They want this thing to go out to the CEO and everyone else in the organization. How do we then turn this thing into an enterprise solution, which we can, scale out, which we can put, the right sorts of refresh cycles around it, or governance and controls, and how do we certify the data and make sure this thing isn't going to explode, and how do we put it out there so that it can be embedded and adopted and used and trusted by the organization. So that's how the two different parts work. So I'm going to dig into that in a bit more detail now. So if we explore then those two frameworks, I've sort of broken it out into parts here, and I'll walk you through how the different parts work. I'll go fairly slowly and I'll talk about each part, but Steve, feel free to jump in at any point. And if there is anything that comes up in the chat as well, I'm happy to ask. The slide after this is going to do a bit of a deep dive into the proof of value area, but for the sake of time, I'm not going to go through in great detail every single thing here, but I'm just going to talk about it in a little bit more detail than I did just now. So this is broken up into different stages. So the first stage is selection. So in your organization, you have a really, you have a conversation with someone around a water cooler, let's say, and they're like, oh, I really want to get this data and I want to do this stuff with it. And it's like, you should do that. Like, it's like, how? So the selection part is creating a process within your organization to be able to capture these ideas and to be able to initially vet whether or not an idea is good or not. So this is like the first phase of trying to figure out whether something should be done. But also capturing it in a place where the organization can monitor it, right? So I've seen this work well with companies that have, project management offices and things like that, where they generally have some sort of process to manage the inception and life cycle of projects. I've also seen this work well where organizations have got like good ICT help desks and things like that, where they can monitor and accept requests. I've also seen Microsoft Forms be used or Power Apps as well. But really what you want to do is create some sort of portal or gateway to capture that demand and capture it in a way that it starts to unpack it. So you want to capture some information. You don't want to make it War and Peace, right? Because people just won't want to do it. So you want to make it small enough that people do want to submit their ideas, but you want to make it detailed enough that you can initially start to score them. When in larger organizations, if you're getting a lot of requests, it can be hard to keep on top of them. So they all need love and respect, of course, but you want to see what the really good ones are and the really valuable ones are, and watch those bubble to the top. So having, being able to capture information around the opportunity request, the business stakeholders, who the sponsor is, who the business owner is going to be, right? That's another big problem I've seen. Who's going to own the solution that you've built? And everyone's kind of looking at each other. Like, let's be clear from the start, like who's asking for this, who's paying for it, and who's going to be kind of, to the best of their knowledge, involved in the project. You also want to understand from a change perspective as well that what the impact of the organization is going to be. So just having some sort of key metrics defined at that stage really helps then work out if this is something that should be invested in further. So moving on from selection, the next phase is elaboration. So I kind of like the word elaboration, kind of exploring and expanding a concept. Discovery works quite nicely for this as well, or analysis even. But this is where we take an idea, maybe we've got a list of 10 ideas and we've prioritized the top 3. And it's like, okay, look, these 3 show real promise already. So let's unpack them a bit further and work out whether there is something here that we want to explore as an organization. And by the way, as I talk about this doesn't always work in this order, right? You might find that someone in the organization has built something really cool already and they want to operationalize it. You then often might need to go back a few steps just to make sure that we've, crossed our T's and dotted our I's. Or maybe they've got enough stuff already and they're ready to move into the next, bluer section of this screen. So yeah, just a call out on that. But essentially, if we're following this process end to end, elaboration, this is for me where the human-centered design part makes this a little bit different from a typical software delivery lifecycle, which also includes, elements of design analysis, right? But I was introduced to digital whiteboarding about 4 years or so ago. There's a tool called Miro, which I've used to pretty good effect. And I think it became more relevant since COVID. We're forced out of our meeting rooms and, it's hard to get in front of a whiteboard. So having this sort of digital landscape to work in and capture ideas was a bit of an eye-opener for me. It kind of got me to think about what I do as an analyst and as sort of a business analyst in a bit of a different way. It's not to say that you still don't do this in person, but the concept of this elaboration then is to, we've learned already about this opportunity that was captured in this list or portal or whatever. Had a bit of a chat with the stakeholder. It seems like it's a really great idea and we want to explore it more. So it's how do you bring people together? How do you have that conversation about, what the business priorities are, what the business problem is, what it is really, really, really we're looking to solve at the heart of it, what the benefits are to the organization, what the types of data sources are there any sorts of security concerns, governance? That conversation then turns into our sort of set of requirements for the solution. And I find the best way to elicit requirements is through user stories. So, that typical, as a, so that or so that as a I want so that kind of approach. So, you know, as an executive, I want to be able to understand how many widgets have been sold over the last 6 months in region X compared to region Y, so I can adjust my marketing approach to get more value from that other region. You know, those types of user stories, I find that if you're good at capturing those from the different personas across the organization, you can almost take those stories away and then look at them and then work out technically what those requirements are from like a functional and non-functional standpoint, and start to work through those, and then almost go back to your audience and say, right, okay, so based on what we heard before and the different stories that we've captured, you know, here are the requirements. How did we go? With a more technical group, you can do this together. But I find a lot of organizations are scared to spend time in the design part, and I think it's super important. Almost the more time you spend elaborating something, the better the chances are that you're going to understand it well enough that it's going to either be closed down early or it's going to be successful. And, you know, wireframing is a massive part of this as well, because, you know, you can draw up what a solution will do. And to a degree, you can build, let's say you had a power app that you wanted to design. You could draw it on a piece of paper and hand it to someone and ask them, would this work? Like use the piece of paper like you would a power app on a tablet, let's say, that you were going to build. You can learn a lot by doing that before you have to build the power app and put it onto the tablet and give it to a person on a shop floor to see if they would be able to use it to do that role. There's a really cool methodology called prototyping, which I really like, which was designed by, I think, Stanford University and popularized by Google. But essentially, it's a phase before prototyping. So it's like a prototype still costs you money. You've still got to invest in some technology and build something, whereas a prototype is a way to try and work with people to understand if an idea is going to work before you invest in it. So I see wireframing in the same way that sort of prototyping would work, where you're trying to design something before you go ahead and build it. Because you might work out with your audience that actually we're not ready to do this. Like we don't have all the data. These systems aren't going to talk to one another, or that sort of thing. So there's a critical point then at the end of step 2, where you've got to decide whether or not you want to actually go ahead with this thing. So pulling all of this information together and then working out with your steering committee whether this is an idea that we want to pursue. So as part of the elaboration phase, you also want to understand technically, you know, what it might cost to build a proof of value, and also what do we think it might cost to build the full thing. But really, it's at this stage that we're we've got our design, we've got our requirements, we know what we want to do. Is it a good idea or not? If it's not a good idea, it stops. You know, maybe it's the wrong time, maybe we don't have money, maybe we don't have the resources to do this thing right now. So we're just going to park it. We're going to prioritize another idea, and maybe we'll review this thing in 3-6 months. Or it's a winner. Like, let's go. Let's build this thing. You know, hopefully, you know, we've got some users that want to, let's say it's a Power BI dashboard. We're going to bring some data into an area for them, maybe a sandbox environment, and we're going to ask them, you know, to go the hardest, build the thing that they want to build. Or maybe you don't want to invest in, you know, data engineering capability, or you don't have the skills. So we're just going to do this thing locally right now. We're going to build it, and we're going to test it with our users and make sure this is something that we actually want to deliver. So the proof of value phase then is all about, you know, designing again, building it, validating it, elaborating it, and it sort of goes around in its own sort of cycle here. So we're really interested at this stage in tracking and measuring whether or not the thing is working as well. So, you know, tools like Power BI are really great for being able to measure the number of views and the uptake of a solution. There's another sort of process that I quite like as well, as it's involved more in the elaboration phase. But for elaboration, quite often, if you're looking at optimizing a business process, you need to map out what that business process is. And there's a technique within Lean Six Sigma called value stream mapping, where you can kind of identify where the wastage is in an approach. So as part of your elaboration, you can kind of identify, well, we want to save all of this time throughout this process. And you can sort of do that as part of your proof of value. Maybe it's not the whole thing, but it's like, we've treated a few parts of this, and yeah, we've removed all of this wasted effort now. So, we're going to free up a couple of FTE each month or whatever it might be. And we've started to be able to identify that's going to work really well. So at the end of that proof of value, you've been able to build it, you've been able to test it works. Maybe we did some early POCs as part of our elaboration as well to test feasibly it was possible technologically. And we've built something and we want to take it to the next level. But before we do that, we need to sort of sense check again. Has it done what we expected it to do? Sometimes it might not. You might build it, you might give it to people, and they might still not use it. Maybe it's, again, not the right time, or maybe there's not investment. Maybe there was a change strategically in the organization and they've gone in a different direction. They've implemented a new CRM or something, and it's kind of like debunked all of the things that we were doing, So at that stage, it might stop, and that's okay. It's better to invest in something to a certain point and stop and save the future costs than it is to keep going with something because we've already built it and this person really wants to build it. They're super keen. They know they can do it. They want to do it. It shouldn't be a conversation around people trying to build really clever things because they can. It should be a case of that building things that actually benefit the organization in some way, as much as we'd love to just build really cool stuff all the time. So let's say we've built the solution, we've tested its capabilities, we've tested it with an audience. It's really good. We want to enterprise it. We want this thing to be more robust. So this is where it enters, I guess, what people typically think about as the process for data lifecycle management, and that's delivery. So there's let's say a technical team of data engineers, and they have a backlog that they're working to. So this is where we might use tools like Jira or DevOps. We start to think of things more like products at this stage. We have a product backlog, we have a product owner. We're going to start to assign people that are actually going to understand how to take maybe this Power BI report that's connected to 10 different data sources and everything is built in this model. Like, how do we now work out, okay, let's unpack this again and find out how we build everything in the right place. And how do we prioritize all of these different really good ideas across the organization and data initiatives that we have into something that we can see what needs to go first and who needs to work on what. So after we've done that, maybe we're going to use Agile and we're going to package work up into blocks of time, like a couple of weeks sprint. There's another phase of designing, building, testing, and releasing. So that really does get into that SDLC approach then, where we are promoting things through different environments. We're doing all of the different sort of technical checks and things like that. We might bring in our design authority here. By the way, we'd probably bring the design authority in the elaboration phase as well to check before we go and build something that it doesn't already exist, or there isn't a different way that we could be doing it. But the change advisory board come in here as well, making sure that if we're going to deploy things, we're not going to impact somebody else. We're aware of all of the other work that's happening across the organization. And this isn't to alienate any smaller organizations as well. I think you could still take parts of this if the organization's really small and still use it without having to go, the full distance. But in this example, we've got this data engineering team. They've built something and they want to embed it within the organization, and they want to validate that it's working and turn it into an operational solution. So that's where it enters the 8th stage of the process. And it's working with the organization. It's great. You still want to measure it at this stage. So similar to how we were in the proof of value phase, we want to track its usage. We want to make sure it's performing correctly, those types of things. But over time, you're going to get bugs. You're going to get things that need to be fixed. People are going to have new great ideas. It's like, oh my God, I love this. This is excellent. Can you build me another page that does this? Or can we drill through this one and get some more information here? How do you manage that request? How is it captured? And how does it hit this delivery backlog? So similarly to how we were capturing opportunities at the beginning in the first selection phase, you want to create some sort of method as well for tracking all of these different types of enhancements and things that we want to do to the solution, so that the delivery team can then prioritize those things with all of the other work that they have in the backlog and work out, sort of what goes first. Again, you might want to bring some sort of steering committee into this conversation, or the delivery team, or the center of excellence, to work out how things should go and what sort of order. So that's the key model, I suppose, and the two different frameworks and how I've seen it help organizations. I'm going to jump into one area specifically, but Steve, do you have any questions before I do?
Yeah, I mean, I very, very interesting, great framework, I think. I really like the emphasis of analyzing whether we should go forward, because I think, as you say, a lot of people start things and are just building it maybe for the sake of building it. Have you experienced that difficulty maybe to try and get people to stop? I imagine I've worked in places with egos and stuff like that. Do you see that a lot and find that difficult to maybe convince people not to go ahead?
Yeah, it's definitely a balancing act. And I've seen solutions have to change through this process to make it through the next gate as well. So, I was working on a solution recently that had really, really great adoption for the first two teams that were using it. But then, and they did their internal testing, but they wanted to go out to a broader pilot group. And when they did that, a couple of the stakeholders had totally different ideas about how it was going to be used. And they were very different from other parts of the organizations which were going to adopt it. And that actually became a deal breaker. It was like, we won't accept this solution if it doesn't do these things. So we actually had to change it. So we went back a stage, we went back to elaboration. It's like, okay, so we're going to have to redesign this part if we want it to go. And it's going to cost a little bit more money. Do we still think it's worth doing? And they did. And we did the change. Everyone loved it. But if we'd been too stubborn as a design team, I suppose, and the technical team, and said, nah, sorry, too late, or the stakeholder had been, I'm not putting any more money into this, it's going out as it is, get used to it. They're the times when that solution probably would have fallen flat, because people would have pushed back, they would have been resistant, they wouldn't have been brought into the process, and they wouldn't have adopted it. So being able to go back a step and bring them back into the process and say, hey, we're listening, we get it. Like, we don't want you to bring something to your world that's going to make your life harder. It's supposed to be making it better. So how can we work together to make it better? So yeah, there's going to be egos. I think sometimes it might be territorial, or there could be other political reasons that something might not be accepted, or people might want to push things forward. And other times, I think it's a case of just really working with people to understand why that is, and then working out if there's a way forward. And if there's not, you still got to shut the stuff down. Like, I think that's where you bring your executives in and your steering committee and say, hey, because often, the data team aren't going to have, unless they've got a really, really strong, chief data officer or chief data analytics officer, or someone who has a seat at the table, it can be quite hard for them to overthrow these other big, powerful forces in an organization that want things to go forward because of whatever thing they've promised to. I don't know.
I see this being a very good way of getting around. When you could build a fantastic solution, but it has to have a problem, right? And a lot of times people can build something fantastic. If it's not solving a problem, or if there's no actual need and no business value to this specific business, this team, then it's not useful. It could be fantastically designed. It could be the best report, the best data model ever. But it kind of has to have that need for it. And I think this is a really, really great way of making sure you have that need, making sure aligned. And I like that kind of iterative way of repeatedly checking that, I think.
Yeah, no, thank you. I think it's design often, it's a group sport, right? And it's a sport that needs to be played quite often. It's part of the process throughout. I think sometimes people design something and then just go ahead and build it right all the way through and get to the end. It's like, oh, we missed something. We didn't capture these technical requirements. And now because of that, we can't actually do this part, and kind of de-scope items, and then it doesn't work properly. So I just think, yeah, continually checking, you know, those temperature checks with your audience as well, I think helps with that overall adoption. So the sort of the other part of this, right, this is very process driven, but even with this, if I'm a user and I'm hearing this for the first time, I'm thinking, well, how do I do this? You know, how do I capture my requests? Or how do I fill in a requirements document? You know, how do I pitch my idea to a group of executives that it's a good idea? How do you do those things? So it's really important as part of this to develop the different tools and technologies or frameworks and processes that are actually going to support people in their day-to-day. So I've got an example here. It's not, you know, a client I'm working with at the moment, actually, I've implemented different run sheets, a bit like this, but for each step, right? So if you were to work through, you know, POV, what are the different steps as users and what are the different people that should be involved in this approach throughout the journey? So one of the things that I find really useful at the start of any type of project that's going to move forward into elaboration is to create a central area for people to collaborate and work. So, you know, the Microsoft Teams platform is really, really good for that. You know, create a team, you've got your files area. Within that files area, if you have all of the different templates already built, you can start with that. Maybe the idea doesn't actually go all the way through, but let's say it's got legs and it might do. You know, having all of those things there available for people to use, then makes it a lot easier to repeat the process in a way that can be well understood by the organization, right? So these steps could be different. It could be less. You might follow all of them. You might follow a few of them. But if we follow the bouncing ball with this, you know, the first thing around POV is planning. So how are we going to manage the work that we're doing? Maybe there's a few people involved in this proof of value. So who's going to do what? You know, when are they going to do it? Knowing that helps you understand if it's going to cost you money or not and how much money. But it's also going to help you manage the project. You know, then it is a Power BI report we're going to build. We're going to build this Power BI solution. Is there a template we can use? Is there something that has our organizational brand or any sorts of standards that we should be following? You know, these types of things really help users know kind of those, you know, where the boundaries are, but also build things that they're confident that they're sort of doing in the right way and they're starting to get into a good process. Again, frameworks are really good as well. You know, I've written a number of different Power BI operational frameworks in the past, and you know, now with the Inventor Fabric, they keep giving me nightmares because they would have changed so much. You need to refresh these things. But having some sort of frameworks within the organization which help people so they can see, you know, if I need to deploy this thing to a different environment, for instance, whatever the technology is, how does that work? What does that look like? You know, how do I apply security in the right place? Those types of things. Testing. How do we do testing? Let's say the organization doesn't have a dedicated tool to do its you know, UAT process. Maybe a planner board would work. You know, maybe Jira would work. What are the tools that we use in the organization already? Let's have a process and let's try and set something up that people can follow that's repeatable. Then with the monitoring component, you know, you've built this proof of value. You want to test that people are using it. It's no good saying, oh, it's great, everyone loves it. You know, let's have some evidence behind that. You know, this thing has got, you know, it's the 10th most used thing in the organization, and we only built it 3 months ago or a month ago or last week or whatever. Having some sort of metrics around usage is really valuable. Also, being able to document the solution too. So at some point, if this does become a solution that's going to be enterprised, you're going to have a support team, or you're going to have someone that's responsible for it, right? Or maybe you're in a business unit and you're the business owner, and you just want to make sure that if the thing breaks, you can bring people in to fix it. But you need to know how the developers left it and what sort of state of build it was at. So having a standard, consistent guide that people can fill in really helps. I've seen this work really well in Confluence and things like that as well. So, but it could be just a Word document, right, to keep things simple. And then the final thing, how do we know that we've done all of the right things as an organization to progress this thing past that 5th gate or 5th stage in our diagram? So, you know, we just want to check, yep, we've done this. No, it got business value, it's good. Yep, no, it did this. Yep, everyone signed off on it. Brilliant. Let's go. It makes it far easier to move that thing forward if you do that. So this is just an example. You know, I found things like this are useful for users to be able to see how to do it. It's kind of like a run sheet on how to actually bring these things forward. So that's the tools and templates side. I'm going to move on to value measuring next, but do you have any quick questions before I do that, Steve? I'm conscious of time as well. We're probably at the hour mark already.
Yeah, I think we're there. Let's move on, and I'll have the questions at the end.
Perfecto. All right. So we've spoken a fair bit about proof of value, and this could be its own framework, right? How do you measure value in an organization? There could be another framework here. I haven't got one that I'm going to talk about today. There are ways that you can do this, but I'm just going to talk about some of the key ways in which we measure value as an organization. So one of the first things up front you would want to do if you're going to be able to identify and measure value is define a clear set of metrics. So they could be around what the organization is going to save from a cost perspective, perhaps, or, how's the efficiency going to increase? What are the ways that we want to track user adoption so that we can measure it later? Is this going to improve any other sorts of downstream business processes? Is it going to fix data quality? How does it line to different strategic decisions or things within the organization? Once you understand that, you can then track it. So having a clear baseline then to work from is really important. So, what does the current state look like? Right now, we understand this about our business process, and we see these as the issues, and these are the problems that we want to fix. If we're aware of those, we can then start to look forward to what our future state is, and then understand when things change, are they changing for the better? And are we able to make those types of assessments? So once we have those, and I've highlighted value realization framework. So there are ways to do this, right? Like tried and tested ways of measuring these types of outcomes. But trying to understand, what the tangible and intangible benefits are of various initiatives that we're running across the organization, and having various milestones in place that we can track throughout the journey. So, at this point, we expect that we're going to fix these problems, perhaps. And then maybe there's another phase where we'd expect to see this type of value being realized. And it's a case of like, if we spend a bit more, we get this back. And if we spend a bit more, we get this back. So if you're going to do it that way, and if you're going to phase out a solution, being able to understand and track those outcomes becomes quite important. So obviously the people are super important, as I've harped on about throughout the process. So you also need to get that feedback constantly throughout the process. It's no good building something, waiting right to the end and saying, is that doing what you need it to do? No, it's totally wrong. No one's going to use this. So having that feedback throughout is super important. And you could, create surveys or things like that, so people can provide anonymous feedback if they're not comfortable talking about it. You can have working groups. You can conduct different interviews. It might be in a workshop, or it might be with individual stakeholders. But to capture that feedback and have that sort of documented almost and evidenced really then helps when you want to push something forward. The financial outcomes. So, is there ROI in this? A lot of times this will come down to the dollars. And I've seen data analytics teams live and die by the value that they provide to an organization. It can be seen as quite an expensive thing to have a dedicated BI capability. But if the team is able to really clearly evidence, well, this is the benefit or the financial value that we're driving for the organization. These are the decisions that we've influenced, or the outcomes that we've generated through some of the data products that have been built. That's a really powerful thing. And total cost of ownership's huge in the IT space. So, you want to make sure that if you're building something new, you're not building another version of something else that already exists. So kind of looking forward and knowing what those things are and what the total cost of producing something is going to be within that data estate is important. Monitoring, sort of mentioned this before, but this is kind of from a point of, monitoring the solution and see how well it's performing, and having some sort of automation around that as well, and different KPIs to be able to track how that's going. but then also, you know, working with stakeholders around different metrics and those types of things. And the final thing is strategically, like, what is the alignment of the solution to the strategic goals? I once recently worked on a project where the organization wanted to align their kind of high-level strategic directions back down to a project level. In fact, I've just started another project where they want to do exactly the same thing. But it's like people want to see what the impact is of the work that they're doing on the high-level part of the organization. So the organization has a vision. It wants to do a particular thing. You know, how is the work that's occurring across the organization going to impact or influence those goals and help the organization get the outcomes that it wants? And those things change regularly as well, right? The organizational structure might change, the strategic direction of the organization might change. So we need to be flexible. And throughout this process, by, you know, getting feedback, sense checking, because projects can run over months or even years as well. So it's really important to ensure that the alignment is still there. And even though maybe you've been building something for a while, it's still the right thing to be doing. So I've just got two sections left. This one is really around tips for implementation. And the final part is a bit of a wrap up. So just a couple of points. When you're doing this, pick technology that makes sense to the organization. And I don't mean choosing AWS or Microsoft Fabric. I'm talking about, like, if you're going to build different tools and templates, pick things that people are going to want to use and are able to use, and perhaps aren't going to cost the organization a bunch of money because you're asking to invest in a whole load of enterprise licenses. Because if you're true about doing this in an organization and you want people to be self-servicing, they're going to need access to these things. So have a view of what that's going to cost. So if it was digital whiteboarding, for instance, you could use the Teams whiteboard rather than investing in 100 licenses for a dedicated, you know, top-end digital whiteboarding tool. So make it easy for people, make it accessible, reduce the complexity, and start small, I suppose, is the thing here. Start with small things and grow it over time. Don't try and do everything at once, because I guarantee it'll be hard. It'll get shut down. Get incremental feedback, get buy-in, start to grow this over time. And that would be the best way to get adoption. So don't try and do everything. Don't overcommit. And the most important thing is have a strong community, whether that's a strong community of data experts or enthusiasts or champions that are going to back you and help move this forward and get more adoption and more engagement from the organization, or whether it's a really strong community of leaders across the organization that are really going to back this as well and help implement things. It's probably the most important thing to have there. So having a center of enablement or a center of excellence or a community of practice or something like that to help support this will really help. So the final part to conclude, as I mentioned at the start, this is somewhat of an evolving process. So I haven't thought through everything. I'm sure there's going to be changes to this. It's really a case of, you know, taking what I see as a more of a technical way of delivering projects in that software delivery lifecycle, but then adding in components of human-centered design and different agile and project methodologies. It's a way to prioritize value and experimentation as part of the process. You've heard the term fail early, but, you know, as part of this, if you follow the approach, you're going to fail, and that's cool. Like, if things aren't successful and maybe it wasn't the best idea, that's okay. So I think coaching the organization into accepting when things are failing is really good, and it's actually quite empowering, because if you fail and you don't deliver something right at the start, you've just saved your organization a bunch of money. That's almost as good as building something and it generating money. By providing, you know, some sort of framework and guidance and having tools is going to help repeat the process in a consistent way. And it's going to facilitate growth and adoption of people in the organization as well. As they're able to do this, they'll get better, they'll get, you know, stronger, they'll teach other people. And the whole sort of data literacy or you know, fluency of the organization will move at a similar type of pace. doing this as well, I mentioned at the end just there around value, but having a view of what the strategic direction of the organization is and what their goals are helps create that alignment, because you're constantly checking back and saying, hey, we want to build this thing. Is this a good idea? Well, actually, yeah, this ticks 5 of my KPIs that are going to do whatever. This is a great idea. So being able to create that alignment and see how some ideas in different parts of the business actually bubble up and have that strategic alignment is super important. And also, done in the right way, this framework would also generate a return on investment for your data initiatives as well, because you're able to articulate what it is you're trying to do, what the problem is you're trying to solve, and where the potential investment would be in delivering it, but also what you would get in return as well for putting it out into the organization. So that brings me to the end, Steve. Yeah, this is my last slide, Q&A.
Excellent. That was really, really interesting, I think. Myself, obviously, also in consulting, a lot of stuff that I really resonated with me. For me, I guess something I've always found is you mentioned stakeholders, buy-in, all of this kind of stuff. Do you have some tips, advice on who to ask, what sort of questions you want to ask, how to help get that stakeholder buy-in early? Anything like that?
I think it's always going to be that typical consultant it depends response, right? But it depends on the size of the organization. It depends on the maturity as well of how they're going with data. Some organizations might be right at the start of this journey. Some might be more mature and experienced. I do see a lot of organizations, even the more mature ones, still returning to the concept of data governance. It's like, now we need to do data governance. It's like, well, you can do it as you go. And doing this sort of starts to build that out as well. So I guess to answer your question, if you've got a leader in your organization who's passionate about using data to produce better outcomes, they're your go-to. You need somebody strong in that space who's able to have those conversations with other senior leaders across the organization and start to do that level of influence where other people are brought into the journey. So from a stakeholder perspective, I often find going to the top is going to help you. Pick an initiative that the COE wants. If you can do something that is going to make the COE happy and make them want to show people, hey, look at this amazing thing, and it's helped me make all of these decisions. I can have conversations with this person now because I've got this data that I never had before. I was always told it was too hard, and now I've got it. It's great. They'll want to do more. And that sort of effect will cascade down the organization, and other people will want to start to do these things as well and improve their business processes and stop their team wasting loads of time doing these manual things that they've always been doing, that they've had to do. And it's, they've seen another way. So it's a bit of influence. It's a bit of art of the possible and getting solutions out there, and, influencing from the top and also from the bottom as well, and finding people in that middle layer who are really passionate. I've seen a lot of different data champions be great at this as well, and SMEs throughout the organization, because they know their stuff. They're able to talk at a level that makes sense to a lot of different people. And if they're able to align that with the strategic direction, they're able to align that with what they need to improve their role and their job and make their life better, they can then influence up from kind of the middle. So yeah, stakeholder management is always something that's important. And I think the final thing is just involve people throughout the entire process. Don't assume that they're going to want the thing that you're building at the end, because they're probably not, because you've probably not listened to them. You just got to constantly listen, be empathetic, adjust your approach to make sure that it works, and not be scared to ask. If you're nervous about what you're building and you don't want to show it because it's not finished, just ask. Show them when it's half done. Like, they'll understand, and they'll probably be amazed at what you've done already. But you can get that feedback, and they might provide some insights there that are going to help you further down the line, rather than just hoping, I know what I'm doing. I've done this before. Everyone else likes my work. Well, yeah, but let's just get the feedback. There's no harm in asking. So yeah, that would be my approach to getting people on board, I suppose. And then that leads into adoption later down the line.
Definitely. Yeah, something I've seen a lot, and I think lots of fantastic advices there. Well, Dan, thank you so much. A lot to go through. I'll definitely be rewatching this one and thinking about some of these in the projects I'm doing as well. You know, Dan, if you want to connect with Dan on LinkedIn, his LinkedIn is in the description below. So definitely please contact with him, and we'll just kind of get his details up on the page here. So, Dan, I guess send me an email if you need. His LinkedIn in there as well. Really interesting to speak to you, Dan. So thank you so much for coming on. I know it's very early in the morning for you. It's kind of in the evening for me and a lot of Europe, and maybe in the middle of the day for some people in the States. Probably some Asia is quite late as well. So definitely nice to be able to do this with a very global presentation here. So thank you so much for coming on.
A great pleasure. Really appreciate the invitation to come and talk about this. And yeah, would love to connect with people afterwards and continue this conversation, because like I said at the start, this is something that's evolving, and I would love for it to go to the next level and bring in other ideas to make this even better as well. So yeah, please do reach out.
Awesome. Really looking forward to see how it evolves. Well, thank you so much, everyone. And yeah, we will speak to everyone soon.
Thank you.